Depends on your playstyle. Right, okay, hopefully that answers your immediate question. But let's sit down now and analyze this properly. When it comes to doing a world conquest, you have many options of countries to choose from. Some countries are naturally going to have buffs for specific domains, like higher army quality or reduction to unrest that helps you overcome certain problems. And this is what I mean by depending on your playstyle. See, this is an issue I struggle with a lot of the time when people go to places like EU4 questions, send a random screenshot of their gamer's career, and ask me something like, what idea should I take next? I have no clue what your goals are, I have no clue what you're struggling with. There isn't a correct answer here, because if you're doing a challenge run where you're trying to build the best fort or something, then the answer is going to be very different to, say, a casual blogging campaign, or a game where you're just trying to complete the mission tree. Maybe your goal is to form the US, in which case you should probably take exploration ideas. This doesn't mean the way you play the game is wrong. At the end of the day, EU4 is a game, and if you're having fun, you're doing it right. However, by construction of the question posed today, we know that your goal is to conquer the world. Since you are here looking for a best country for a world conquest and not a how to deal with 3k overextension 1452 guide, I'm also assuming that you'll be pretty happy if the run is completed by 1821, and you aren't trying to optimize an early completion. That is good. Identifying your goals is a good first step for getting advice. But now we need to identify what specifically you struggle with, because from my experience there are 4 main things that stop you completing a run, and a secret 5th thing which I will reveal at the end, as it happens to be simultaneously the least but also the most important thing for a world conquest. With that said, before we go identify these things, let's get the usual stuff out of the way. A like on the video would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. But enough self-shilling, let's begin with the 4 things. Number 1. Enemy armies. The AI is going to fight back. Number 2. Internal stability. Rebels, bad events from overextension, and so on. 3. Lack of resources. Running out of money, running out of manpower, running out of admin to core things. 4. Lack of time. The game does end in 1821, so if you're trying to do it in Iron Man, well, you've kind of stopped there. An important thing to notice is how these problems also tend to have significant overlap. After all, if you had 100 extra income a month, that would let you get more force limit and hence be able to beat an AI army you possibly couldn't before. More money means more to spend on advisors, so if you can afford a higher level admin advisor, there is more admin coming in for your coring. Even something like internal stability. Well, if you had until 1921 instead of 1821 to complete the world conquest, you wouldn't need to be overextending as much, making you more stable and hence making rebels less of an issue. Also, rebels are an issue because your troops are busy fighting them instead of fighting for expansion, so a better army means less level problems in an ironic way. Furthermore, more time means more time to generate admin points for coring, more manpower recovered, more money made. Naturally, there isn't a perfect translation between these, but it is important to recognize the overlaps. Furthermore, recognizing these issues is also important for things like idea selection. This is why personally, for example, I think outside of specific builds where you need a buff or a policy, innovative ideas, for example, are pretty useless. Because what problem do they actually solve? The common things named as examples of why innovative is good are better solved by other individual groups. Advisor cost reduction, for example, is nice, but you could also just take something like trade and make more money, so you can just afford the advisors, and then afford other things as well in the process. Innovativeness? Well, yes, you can get to 100% innovativeness faster, but when you do, that whole section becomes useless, and while 10% all power cost is neat, you can get 25% core creation cost if you're struggling with coring, or 10% dev cost from infrastructure without having to wait around for the innovativeness to get to 100% anyway. And when it does get to 100, you get both the all power cost and dev cost if you didn't take innovative as well. By all means, if you like to the idea group, or want to roleplay as Big Brain Lubeck or something, you are having fun, so go for it. But if we are taking idea groups that help enable world conquest runs, well, there are other ideas that solve those problems better. Anyway, this is not an idea video, just an example I wanted to address. With that said, let's go through some of the countries by geography, usually picked for world conquest, and talk about why they're selected, and if I would suggest them or not. A country that has recently fallen out popularity but was still quite commonly picked for world conquest and used to be very popular back in the day is of course France. Regarding the first option, enemy armies, the French army is good. To top off a pretty impressive starting army of 25,000 as well as all of your subjects that help you fight, you're also going to be running around with 18 ducats to pay for the whole thing, as well as 5% discipline, 15 morale of armies, and 20% manpower recovery rate. In terms of internal stability, you do pick up -1 unrest, but there's not that much, and this is the issue where I think France starts to fall behind. The French are good at fighting, they're not good at maintaining their stranglehold on their conquests. Furthermore, when it comes to lack of resources, your economic buffs aren't great. You get 10% national tax, and honestly, that's about it. The dev cost is certainly nice if you use it, but the French aren't that great or any specifically better than any other nation for making money or generating resources such as admin. Overall, I believe France gets picked because their strong army is a very interesting choice for a lot of people that struggle with early expansion. However, if you struggle with fighting the AI and the AI armies and you need something like France to help you win battles, my issue is you're probably going to be lacking the skills for the internal stability and the lack of resources or lack of time department to be able to, well, secure your world conquest. This is why France is probably one of the most common seen failed world conquest attempts, even though you're going to get a very nice early start and you're going to have very little issues in retaking your cause and expanding further into Germany or into Spain or into England or into Italy or wherever you want to go. Eventually you're going to run out of steam and you have very few buffs to help you going beyond that. The next country I want to talk about is going to be Castile, more specifically into Spain. Much like France, you also have some very nice strong starting armies, and when you form Spain, you pick up some morale and discipline too. You also get Aragon relatively early from the Iberian Wedding, which, if you keep around until you form Spain, which you should, also means you, much like France, have a little mini vassal subject swarm to help you fight. Although in the case of Aragon, compared to the French vassals, it's one big subject that helps you fight instead of many small ones. In terms of internal stability, Castile certainly doesn't start in the best spot, but Castile does have a lot of buffs for working around the Pope, which means that if you remain Catholic and are fully able to utilize the papal mechanics, which include a bunch of buffs, including some improved relations for dealing with aggressive expansion, but more specifically for internal stability, being able to gain stability points back literally from a button press, as well as getting some dip annexation cost and some manpower recovery speed for your resource generation, well, it's quite a good religion for that, and a great nation to do that as well. Spain also starts in quite a strong position. Again, that's a bonus towards the enemy armies and dealing with them thing, and more of a way to address the lack of resources. And in this case, I think Spain's a bit better than the French because your colonial path is quite open to you. This, however, is where my issue comes in with Spain, is that unlike someone like France who could just conquer a colonizer like Castile to grab hold of the colonies, as Castile you kind of tend to have to colonize yourself. The issue, of course, of colonization is that you're going to have to invest resources into colonization. Those are resources that are being invested into, well, grabbing the New World instead of resources that are being invested into conquering the world. This means that, unlike someone like France who can just turn up and take your colonies, you have to actually make them, which requires significantly more investment on your part, and is something to be very cautious about. Regardless though, it's in a great position to make a lot of money, it's in a great position to have a strong army, it's Spain, and I think it's honestly a pretty decent choice. However, much like France, I find a lot of Castile games tend to run out of steam, because there's very little that actually gives you buffs to direct expansion, and furthermore, you are going to have to spend more time expanding in the New World, and again, something that is certainly doable, but there are better options for the world conquest. The next country I want to talk about is Austria. Remarkably enough, Austria actually has some pretty decent army quality within its ideas. Only 10% morale, not 15, but you still have 5 discipline, so you're pretty comparable to the French, and unlike the others, you actually start with your morale right away. Furthermore, you have access to the Holy Roman Empire, and that's something that you should keep around as much as possible, because this is going to give you a lot more force limit, if you can see we're already at 63 force limit, which is going to be a good way of dealing with, well, the AI fighting back. You can afford to have larger armies to deal with the AI. Furthermore, the internal stability is going to be less of an issue because of your HRE revokes that you're able to carry out for a lot of free expansion, but we have to bear in mind though that you have no inherent bonuses for it. In terms of lack of resources, well, you're not making that much money, but you're in a position to make a decent chunk of change from Tyrol, as well as expand into gold mines such as Hont and Cheb to kickstart your economy. Meanwhile, the Venetian end node is right south of you. In fact, you already start with 3% of it, so that is a pretty clear early expansion path. So in terms of generating resources, I don't think Austria really struggles. However, it is something to be more cautious about. You don't exactly have any economic bonuses running around in your ideas. Another thing to mention, however, is you don't have access to any core creation cost reduction, although the dip annexation cost from Imperial ambitions should not be diminished, as it can be used to somewhat mitigate that by expanding through vassals a lot more aggressively, knowing that you'll be able to annex them for cheaper. Overall though, I would say that while Austria and learning how to play Austria is not going to be the most useful things for playing EU4 in general, I believe that Austria is a combination of both one of the easier world conquest tags to achieve it with, as well as a pretty unique gameplay. So in terms of my recommendation, I would say that yes, if you're going for your first world conquest, give Austria a go. But another classic option is going to be, of course, the Ottomans. These guys are absolute monsters. Starting with 5% discipline and a very, very healthy army, and more specifically, really weak nations immediately around it. I'm sorry, unlike Austria that has to fight something like Venice or even Bohemia or Hungary early on, the Ottomans are not going to be fighting any particularly strong targets. Things like Karaman, Kandar and Serbia aren't exactly going to be putting up a big fight, meaning that your early expansion and early consolidation is going to be relatively easy, as you're able to trivially crush most of your early opposition. This is combined with quite a strong army, as 5% discipline goes quite a long way, combined with a 20% manpower recovery speed to help you recover your manpower and losses, as well as 25% force limit to just field a lot more troops. Now, you are already Sunni, and Sunni is quite a strong religion, but with the Ottomans specifically, and your +3 tolerance of heathens, you're going to have quite naturally a relatively easy humanist build as the Ottomans for tolerating a lot of people and hence preventing a lot of internal stability issues. Now, of course, you can go humanist with just about everyone in the game. However, with the Ottomans specifically, because of that +3 tolerance to the true faith that you have in your ideas right off the bat, that's going to work even better for you. Furthermore, the -2 national unrest from the Ottoman ideas, as well as a list of all the other buffs they have access to, you're not going to have many issues with internal stability compared to other countries that don't have these bonuses. So I believe they're quite a good one on that regard too. Furthermore, money's not going to be an issue, as you already have 50% of Constantinople, and that's before you grab, well, Constantinople itself from Byzantium, and a relatively easy time making it into an end node when you're going to Ragusa. Furthermore, the riches of Persia, Aleppo and Basra, as well as the surrounding area, and furthermore India, are going to be quite attainable for you, as there's not that many strong tags in your way to expanding east until you hit something like the Timurids in Persia, by which point you should be strong enough to fight them. The Ottomans also, of course, have a really expensive and quite strong mission tree, which should be quite helpful for your first world conquest attempts. And of course, the best thing about it is you don't have to worry about fighting the Ottomans early, or in any way having to worry about the Ottomans getting too strong, because you are the Ottomans. There are some more unique disasters and issues that have been added to the Ottomans, such as the decadence mechanic, which means something that you have to bear in mind, but that is, again, just an issue that you have to manage, and it's completely manageable if you know what you're doing. Furthermore, with certain disasters such as the Janissary coup, they actually allow you to switch into things like the Western military, which are quite strong, and allows you to mitigate one of your bigger issues as the Ottomans, which is namely that, of course, you tend to fall off by the time you get into the late game, as Western military units are going to be a lot better than your Anatolian ones by the late game. Overall, I would definitely recommend Ottomans as well for anyone attempting their first world conquest. However, if you want a specific recommendation and not merely a yes-no on a country, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to go with the Mughals for the best nation to do your first world conquest with. Not only do you literally open with 25% core creation cost and some cavalry combat ability buffs for your early game, as the Mughals you have access to some really strong reforms. For example, the Mughal Diran, which allows you to assimilate cultures into administration. This is absolutely massive for internal stability, as this severely decreases the amount of unrest you're generating from unaccepted cultures. You're able to combine this with the Indian Sultanate as well to get quite a lot of tolerance of heathens as well, which means a humanist Mughal build is very good at tolerating and preventing uprisings pretty much everywhere. In terms of lack of resources, you're also in one of the richest parts of the world, if not the richest parts, India. In terms of generating money, you're going to have no issues here at all. And of course, more money means more money to spend on advisors and overcoming those issues, which again, work really well with you as the Mughals, as one of the first cultures you're going to be assimilating is going to be the Hindustani, giving you access to a further 10% core creation cost. So you're able to combine 25% core creation costs right off the bat, with a relatively early cultural assimilation of the Hindustanis, which you can see here. You don't have to conquer that much or anything too ridiculous to get access to this -10% CCR. When you do, and you combine it with something like administrative ideas, which by the third group include -25% core creation cost, you're going to be running around with 60% core creation cost, which goes all the way up to 80 when you include the permanent claims that you get on pretty much India. Furthermore, this mission here gives you access to 10 admin efficiency if you decide to release the Viceroyalty of Deccan, which you absolutely should, until the end of the game, which is very strong. And your missions are certainly nothing to complain about. They're even furthermore getting a rework in the current upcoming DLC Winds of Change, which is probably going to make them even stronger, but I can't comment on that yet considering I haven't seen them. Of course, there's been a dev diary, but the dev diary has only revealed some of the missions, not all of them, so we'll have to see how that works out. Furthermore, if you start as the Timurids, you're going to be able to, well, consolidate your subjects relatively early and start with a very strong army, being already a domineering power within the Persia area. This is going to give you a very strong setup for going into the Mughals yourself. Overall, cultural assimilation combined with the 10 admin efficiency you get from a mission, as well as your really strong starting army position, means that I would personally think that the Mughals, or Timurids into Mughals, are probably the easiest world conquest for you to attempt, and this is the one I would suggest for most people. Unlike, however, some of the European tags mentioned earlier, you are going to be relatively far away from institutions, so be wary of that. You are going to need to develop your institutions, although you are in India, so farmlands, cloth provinces that help you develop really cheaply and get your institutions going aren't exactly hard to come by. Bear in mind, of course, that cotton also has local development costs as well, and let's just say there's a lot of cotton, as well as cloth in the India area, making it just a beautiful land with dev institutions if you need it. However, another tag that I think is worth mentioning, especially if you are considering a first world conquest, because I don't really hear about it being talked about as much, even though it's really strong, is of course just going to be straight up starting as Ashikaga. A lot of people do play as Japan, and don't get me wrong, but a lot of people play it as Hosokawa or someone like Oda, unite Japan, and then play Japan pretty conventionally. You can do that, and it's certainly a campaign. However, you also need to consider playing around as Ashikaga and playing around as the Shogun, as this pretty much gives you a vassal swarm of HRE proportions right off the bat. You don't need to mess around with Austria like to do a revoke to get the vassal swarm, you just have it. So if your goals for World Conquest don't include annexing the world and you're happy to just have your subjects own the entire thing, Ashikaga is definitely one person for you to consider. This lets you overcome many issues such as the enemy army problem. Because, for example, if we're to take a look at declaring war on Ainu, yes, we have our starting army, but we're going to bring 400k worth of, well, force limit into the equation, and this is in 1444. No other nation can field 400k force limit at all. Granted, of course, your subjects aren't going to be exactly using all of it. You're probably going to be lucky to have 100k on the front lines, but this just goes to show how much potential there is for this. Furthermore, another thing that's important to remember is that Ashikaga tends to be pretty passive when being played by an AI, and they don't tend to declare their own wars that much, which lets the players, or the AI daimyos, kind of consolidate themselves by fighting each other. But if you are at war with Korea, of course, that means that Hosokawa and Yamana are also at war with Korea, meaning that they can't be at war with each other. This lets you prevent a lot of the early consolidation by the daimyos, and remember, if none of them grow too strong, none of them grow strong enough to threaten you as the head, well, shogun. I would still recommend, for example, in the invasion of Korea, that because this land is quite good and culturally homogenous, that you take it over yourself as primary domain, but the rest of the world you can feel free to feed to your vassals. Just make sure you're not literally an OPM, as this is going to make anyone, when they get too big, a bit too strong for you and start getting liberty desire issues. With that said though, to get back our list of the 4 important things that stop you from a world conquest, enemy armies are not going to be much of an issue. With your vassal swarm, you're literally in a position to fight them day one. Regarding internal stability, because you're expanding through vassals and feeding all that land to your vassals for most of the time as well, well, that's not going to be an issue because you're not exactly going to be overextended. This can also really help you with the lack of resources, as, okay, you're going to be making quite a bit less money because all of that land is going to be held by vassals, but you don't need to be making that much money because you don't need to run +5 advisors everywhere, you don't need to pay for a lot of your troops because your vassals are paying for those troops. And again, you're not spending that much admin because you're not coring. This also, again, feeds into the main issue of running out of time, as in, well, you're not going to have any admin efficiency bonuses to expand with, but hey, that's what truce breaking is for. When you're nice and small and not overextended, stabbing up shouldn't be too expensive. Now, is Ashikaga the best nation to world conquest with? Well, it depends. If you really enjoy the HRE vassal swarm mechanics and you like playing around with that, then arguably yes, you basically do already start with the vassal swarm. However, I think that much like Austria, it kind of teaches you the wrong things as how to approach the world conquest, and they're a very unique country in that regard. So I wouldn't actually recommend them as an option, but I think they're not really talked about as an option for a world conquest as much as they really should be, which is why I'm bringing them up here. Overall though, if you enjoy Austria gameplay, I think you should try an Ashikaga campaign yourself, as it's basically a HRE revoke in 1444. So with all that said, what is the secret fifth thing? Well, world conquests tend to get grindy. Unironically enough, once you're in a position where you know you're winning, you need the motivation to keep going to complete the run. And this is a pretty important factor. All the admin efficiency on the planet is not going to stop you from getting bored and abandoning a campaign. At the end of the day, EU4 is a game, so make sure you treat it as such. Have fun with it. Just because you see Floriwari do a 1445 Haida, no loans, no troops, no declaring war, no unpausing world conquest, this is a game after all, so make sure you also ask yourself, do you want to complete a world conquest because you think it's fun, or because you want to prove something to someone? Let's be clear here, completing a world conquest doesn't make you a better person. Not completing one doesn't make you a worse one. As for other people running around doing crazy things, well, to that regard, one truth remains self-evident. Comparison is the theft of joy. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.